In Jules Verne's classic tale of adventure, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, what was thought to be a fearsome monster terrorizing the sea lanes, devouring whole ships and crews, stirring a public frenzy, was in fact a fantastic submarine, the Nautilus, built by the mysterious genius inventor, Captain Nemo. Behind this facade of an avenging beast from the depths was in reality a secret advanced technology, a submersible boat, the product of engineering know-how years ahead of its time. This technical marvel gave its creator, Captain Nemo, dominion over the oceans of the world. Verne echoes this theme of clandestine super technology, again the product of a reclusive genius, in another novel entitled Robur the Conqueror, and its sequel, Master of the World. But instead of a submarine, these tales are of an extraordinary flying machine called the Albatross. A compelling contemporary version of this scenario is revealed in W.A. Harbinson's dark novel, Genesis. Only in this tale, flying saucers are the instruments of twisted genius. Published in 1980, this book tells of a brilliant scientist and aeronautical engineer named Wilson, who perfects flying saucer technology for the Nazis during World War II. As Allied armies overrun the crumbling Reich, Wilson escapes by U-boat to Antarctica, and from a secret base constructed there, he sets about his evil plan for world dominion, with flying discs masquerading as UFOs piloted by aliens from space. Having mastered techniques in biomechanics, DNA replication, and brain implants, as well as anti-gravity propulsion, he systematically abducts people of influence in government, industry, science, and the military, turning them into living robots, mindless drones to serve his one world order empire. Based on research into secret Nazi weapons projects, Harbinson's novel explores the possibility that UFOs, flying saucers, may not be alien spaceships after all, but the super-secret military technology of planet Earth. In his book, Harbinson reveals an extensive appendix of data that supports this theory. Some of his revelations are startling, and with this video essay we intend to examine his findings as well as additional information that reconsiders the origins of UFOs. The UFO mystery has been one of the premier enigmas of the late 20th century. So much so, eyewitness accounts like the famed Betty and Barney Hill abduction are now indelibly woven into the fabric of our contemporary culture. Their story is but a fragment of a vast accumulation of evidence, photographs, landing tracks, and innumerable accounts from credible witnesses that report strange objects flying in our skies, machines of intelligent design that cannot be accounted for given our accepted technological paradigm. These unidentified flying objects exhibit flight capabilities that defy our accepted laws of aerodynamics. As such, logic declares these bizarre craft must come from somewhere beyond our world. The notion that any such flying machines could have been the invention of Nazi World War II technology seems like the wildest tabloid nonsense. Yet under closer examination, this suggestion becomes a more haunting possibility. We know as historical fact such technological wizardry as television, jet aircraft, and guided missiles were developed by German science during World War II. And it is well known that Hitler repeatedly boasted possession of a secret super-weapon arsenal that would rescue the fading dream of Nazi conquest. Were his words just desperate, empty bravado? Is it possible that flying saucers were an integral part of this weaponry? The real truth is difficult to ascertain, yet a tantalizing trail of clues and conjectures beckons investigation into the myth of German saucers. Western civilization for the latter half of the 20th century has been dominated by advances in science and technology. Most of these wonders of scientific ingenuity existed behind closed doors long before their common acceptance by the public at large. Antibiotics were discovered in 1910 but not applied until 1940. The physics for using the atom as a source of energy was understood as scientific fact as early as 1919. To the public, such technology was pure science fiction until August 6, 1945, when the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan. Television-guided smart bombs used in the 1991 Gulf War against Iraq were a technological advancement developed by Germany in World War II. In fact, the first television transmissions of the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin showcased yet another marvel of German scientific genius. But by 1944, despite such extraordinary technical genius, the German war machine was failing. Cities, factories, oil dumps, railways, and shipyards were being pummeled mercilessly by Allied bombers. In November of that year, debriefed Allied bomber crews began reporting strange balls of glowing light that seemed to follow their planes. Somehow intelligently guided, these lights would ascend from the ground to meet the approaching bombers. Close proximity to these objects caused reported engine malfunction, and some bombers allegedly crashed as a result of this effect. The New York Herald Tribune reported, "The balls of fire appear suddenly and accompany the planes for miles. They seem to be radio-controlled from the ground, so official intelligence reports reveal." 8th Army Corps and the RAF concluded these Foo Fighters, as they were called, were simply mass hallucinations on the part of jittery flight crews. Shortly before the German surrender, these Foo Fighters disappeared. Italian author Renato Vesco, in his book Intercept UFO, reveals Foo Fighters were more than mere hallucinations. A remote-controlled device called the Führerball, or Fireball, was a turbojet-powered armored disc built by the Wiener Neustadt aircraft manufacturing plant. It was responsible for the Foo Fighter reports. By day, the Führerball could be seen as a shiny metal disc spinning on its axis. By night, it looked like a glowing ball of fire. A rich fuel mixture over-ionized the air surrounding the disc, creating a fiery halo. It was designed to home in on enemy aircraft engine exhaust and was capable of generating damaging electromagnetic impulses that interfered with the ignition systems of bomber engines. As the war progressed, London, England was pounded relentlessly by V-1 and V-2 rockets, revolutionary flying bombs, more commonly referred to as guided missiles. These weapons were devastatingly real, but what other types of secret weaponry did the Nazis possess? According to W.A. Harbison's research, a Luftwaffe captain named Rudolf Schriever, an aeronautical engineer, was credited for designing a craft called a flying top as early as the spring of 1941. A prototype was test-flown in June of 1942. By August 1943, he had constructed a large specimen of his original disc. The flying top itself was a large disc fan of 20 meters diameter with 21 rotor blades that surrounded a hemispherical cockpit. Attached to the underside of the disc rotor were 3 jet engines that spun the rotor like a helicopter for vertical takeoff. Once in the air, 2 other lower body jets attached to each side allowed the disc to achieve level flight. Propulsion systems used conventional, kerosene-burning jet turbine engines. By the summer of 1944, at the BMW plant in Prague, Czechoslovakia, Schriever was working on a radically redesigned engine for this craft. Collaborating with two other German engineers on this project, Drs. Habermohl and Mita, as well as an Italian physicist, Dr. Belluzzo, these men designed a flying disc 138 feet in diameter that could reach 40,000 feet altitude and was capable of 1,250 miles per hour horizontal flight speed. The configuration was a fixed cupola cockpit in the center of a discus plate that rotated around it. After the war, Schriever admitted to constructing the disc, but claimed it was never flown. To keep it from the hands of the advancing Allies, it was destroyed, along with all planning designs. However, an alleged eyewitness, George Klein, claims this or a similar disc was successfully test-flown in February of 1945. Author Renato Vesco, in his book Intercept UFO, states that right up to the time of his death in the late 1950s, German engineer Rudolf Schriever was convinced UFO sightings after the war were proof that someone had successfully advanced his original designs. Research by authors Wendell Stevens and William Steinman in their book UFO Crash at Aztec reveals additional Nazi saucer development projects. Victor Schauberger was an Austrian forest warden, naturalist, philosopher, and inventor whose observations revealed the vortex as nature's most efficient means for the transmission of energy. To serve the Nazi quest for alternative energy sources, Schauberger was coerced to put his theories to use. He built a 10-foot diameter vortex propulsion machine at a facility in Vienna that generated diamagnetic levitation. This machine produced results so spectacular that it took off vertically, shooting straight through the 24-foot-high hangar ceiling. Schauberger's research fame earned him a private audience with Hitler in the 1930s, where he warned the Führer that the short-termism of the National Socialist State's economic strategy would undermine and ultimately destroy Germany's natural resources. Hitler's 1,000-year Reich, Schauberger declared, would be lucky to last a decade. His warning proved true. Work continued on his levitating machines until 1945, but was ultimately halted by the invading Allied armies. Captured and deported to the United States, Schauberger was confined and coerced into relinquishing his technical secrets. Authorities claimed rights to all his ideas, thoughts, and discoveries, past as well as future. His intellect, indeed his whole being, had become United States property. Dejected, he died on September 25, 1958, at the age of 74. "I don't even own myself any longer," he remarked. Finally, the war effort collapsed by the spring of 1945. Germany's Reich fell to the American, British, and Russian armies. But Allied commanders were clearly shaken by the advances of captured Nazi weapons technology. Sir Roy Fedden, leader of a technical mission to Germany for the British Ministry of Aircraft Production, stated, "I have seen enough of their designs and production plans to realize that if they had managed to prolong the war some months longer, we would have been confronted with a set of entirely new and deadly developments in air warfare." Later in 1956, United States Air Force Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, head of Project Blue Book, stated, "When World War II ended, the Germans had several radical types of aircraft and guided missiles under development. The majority of these were in the most preliminary stages, but they were the only known aircraft that could even approach the performances of the objects reported by UFO observers." American, British, and Soviet technical intelligence experts picked the bones of the Nazi war machine. Personnel and material flowed back to each respective country. Nazi rocket designer Werner von Braun and 300 railroad freight cars loaded with captured V-2 rocket components were shipped to White Sands, New Mexico for him to reassemble as America's rocket program, which over the ensuing decades would successfully launch men to the moon. Project Saucer seemed to have been consigned to oblivion. Little more was revealed about the fate of engineers, plans, or hardware. But a persistent rumor remained that a top-secret division within the Nazi SS called SSE-4 had successfully developed anti-gravity saucer propulsion systems. But had all of these secret technologies been captured or accounted for when the war ended? In 1939, a large tract of land in the Antarctic was seized from Norway by Germany and renamed Neuschwabenland. According to Harbison's research, just 2 months after the German surrender, captured U-boat crews, under interrogation by United States authorities, revealed they had been delivering components, materiel, and members of the Project Saucer research team to underground facilities in the Antarctic. In January of 1947, Operation High Jump, a naval military task force complete with 4,000 combat troops, 13 ships, and an aircraft carrier loaded with seaplanes and helicopters, was dispatched to the Antarctic for the alleged purpose of mapping the coastline. Under command of Admiral Richard E. Byrd, the task force was provisioned for an 8-month stay. However, his combat contingent withdrew after only 8 weeks. Rumor was the task force had encountered hostile action. Planes were lost, and Byrd is alleged to have stated cryptically there was potential for attack by fighters that are able to fly from one pole to the other with incredible speed. Had the Germans sacrificed their European operation to buy time for construction of a fallback position at the South Pole? Had Admiral Byrd's combat group been ambushed and turned back by a technically advanced remnant of the Third Reich armed with flying saucers? The mystery remains unanswered to this day, but in 1947, the public fascination with UFOs was just beginning. A press release in June of that year flashed the sensational report of a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold, who claimed seeing a formation of 9 shiny objects cruising at high speed near Mount Rainier, Washington. In Arnold's words, these craft flew like a saucer would if you skipped it across the water. The press seized upon the word saucer, and thus the national flying saucer craze was launched. However, Arnold further stated the objects themselves looked more crescent-shaped, like flying wings, which coincidentally was another radical airform designed by the German Horten brothers during World War II. In addition, these craft were on a heading for the Canadian border about 140 miles from Mount Rainier. According to author W.A. Harbison, as early as 1946, joint American-Canadian-British saucer research was underway in the wilds of Western Canada. Just 4 months later, in September of 1947, the Strategic Air Command undertook a curious project in Alaska. Major Wendell Stevens was assigned to the Fort Richardson Air Base to serve with Project Ptarmigan. Named after an Arctic snowbird, this mission called for a detailed survey mapping and reconnaissance of the North Pole.
Colonel Stevens is still an active pilot. After World War II, he was assigned to an air base in Alaska, where he debriefed B-29 crews who frequently described encounters with strange circular aircraft.
My first experience with a UFO report, personal experience that is, was when one of the crews returned and said that they saw a bogey, that's what they called them, up there that was moving at high speed at higher altitude than they could fly. And the crews later, I found out that they often referred to them as enemy aircraft or Russian aircraft, but usually bogies. And they tried to describe it, but it moved at faster speeds than anything we had. We didn't have jet airplanes then. Later we measured one that was flying 7,000 miles an hour, measured it on radar. So these clearly exceeded any of our capabilities in 1940, any capabilities of anybody in the world in 1947. On an average of about twice a month, I would get some kind of a UFO report, and they would see these circular craft, sometimes close, sometimes far, sometimes more than one. I remember a crew describing one sitting on the ice pack, and this is something we couldn't do. We didn't have any way to land up there, and they seemed to be operating in airspace without a visible support base. It took a fantastic base for us to maintain the B-29s, just to support them flying in the Arctic. I even had one crew describe one that they saw underwater that surfaced, rose off the water, and flew away. Now, this clearly exceeded any design capabilities that we knew of in the world. The B-29s flying these reconnaissance missions were equipped with a variety of cameras. At various times, they got pictures of these UFOs seen in the Arctic airspace on various of the cameras, and sometimes on all of the cameras. At least this is what they reported. I never got to see any of it because we took the film cartridges out, packed it in the box, and shipped it off to Washington, to Andrews Air Force Base, where the officer was met by Pentagon intelligence and taken someplace.
B-29 Project Commander Major Charles Moss concluded the unidentified seen by flight crews over the pole in September of 1947 to be a secret Russian development possibly advanced from captured German designs. But were these the same craft that Admiral Byrd had reported at the South Pole in January of 1947, able to fly from one pole to another with incredible speed? It is undeniable that 1947 was a watershed year in UFO history. Aside from the unidentified craft encountered by U.S. military at both poles, as well as the Kenneth Arnold sighting in Washington State, the Army Air Corps was dealing with unknowns reportedly crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. In his book, The Day After Roswell, Colonel Philip Corso revealed military concern that the crashed spacecraft recovered in the New Mexico desert also displayed suspiciously Nazi origins. Conversations with Werner von Braun and Willy Ley at Alamogordo in the days after the crash intimated that there was a deeper story about what the Germans had engineered. The similarity between the Horten flying wing and the craft they had pulled out of the Arroyo was no accident. Dr. Hermann Oberth considered the Roswell craft from the New Mexico desert not a spacecraft, but a time machine. Therefore, perhaps the extraterrestrials described in the medical autopsy reports were humanoid robots rather than life forms, specifically engineered for long-distance travel through space or time. UFOs Reconsidered. Is it possible that the extraordinary research uncovered by W.A. Harbinson in his book Genesis reveals a factual story about German flying saucer technology that can only be told as fiction? Fantastic weapon science was not the exclusive province of Nazis alone. Thanks to the war, American physicists and engineers were investigating anti-gravity technologies as well. By 1943, the terrible losses of Allied shipping due to submarine attacks was forcing the United States Navy to consider techniques for making ships invisible to radar. It was theorized that a sufficiently powerful electromagnetic field could render a vessel undetectable to enemy radar. However, physicists advanced this idea to a more daring degree, suggesting that generating a more intense energy field could make a ship visually invisible as well. According to the research of William Moore and Charles Berlitz in their book The Philadelphia Experiment, The destroyer Eldridge and a volunteer crew were allegedly involved in a practical test of this theory, which rendered the destroyer invisible. This project stemmed from Einstein's unified field theory research, which postulates time, space, and gravity can be manipulated by a sufficiently powerful electromagnetic field. During the war, Albert Einstein was briefly employed by the Navy Department. Despite official denial that any such test took place, proponents of this story point out that through this research, the Navy inadvertently stumbled onto the fundamentals of anti-gravity propulsion. Physicists determined the ideal airform for the application of electromagnetic resonance propulsion would be an oblate spheroid. In other words, a flying saucer. By the 1950s, the world had transformed into an amazing science fiction reality full of technological promise. 10 years earlier, the notion of splitting the atom to create an explosion had been pure Buck Rogers fantasy. But by the early 50s, ongoing nuclear bomb testing in Nevada and the Pacific was routine. Jet aircraft, rockets, and television were new high-tech additions to our world as well. In California, a man named George Adamski claimed to be entertaining visitors from Venus. He shared books, photographs, and home movies of his flying saucer adventures that fanned the fires of the popular UFO craze. Hollywood capitalized on the flying saucer mania by serving up potboiler movies filled with grotesque aliens invading from space. And concurrent with cinema and tabloid UFO exploitation was the perpetual propaganda theme that no agency of this earth could possibly produce flying saucer technology. But was the secret to flying saucer propulsion now within America's reach? In 1953, T. Townsend Brown, another physicist allegedly involved in the Philadelphia experiment, was demonstrating practical application of anti-gravity propulsion. In a laboratory setting, the flight of tethered, disc-shaped airfoils, 2 feet in diameter around a 20-foot diameter course, produced an observable speed of an amazing 17 feet per second, about 12 miles an hour. The disc-shaped airfoils emitted a slight hum and a bluish electrical glow. At a later demonstration, Brown exhibited a set of discs 3 feet across, flying a 50-foot diameter course, with results so spectacular that they were immediately classified. In November of 1955, the New York Herald Tribune published a series of articles by military aviation editor Ansel E. Talbert, outlining a government project to harness gravitation as a means of aircraft and spacecraft propulsion. Some of America's top scientific minds, such as Edward Teller and Robert Oppenheimer, both pioneers in atomic bomb development, were named as proponents of this project. Talbert went on to describe these amazing anti-gravity ships as capable of acceleration in a few seconds to speeds of many thousands of miles an hour, and making sudden changes of course at these speeds without subjecting the passengers to the so-called G-forces caused by gravity's pull are also envisioned. These flight characteristics Talbert described for such futuristic aircraft were already being observed in reported UFO flight behavior. Some of the companies allegedly involved in anti-gravity propulsion research were notables as Bell Aircraft, Sperry Rand Corporation, Glenn L. Martin Corporation, and General Electric. According to researcher Stan Deyo, a technical paper published in December of 1956 by Gravity Rand Limited of London, entitled The Gravitics Situation, bluntly implied mankind had already developed anti-gravity propulsion based on the research of T. Townsend Brown. A program in hand may now ensure that development of large-sized disks will be continued. This is backed by the United States government. Already companies are specializing in evolution of particular components of an electrogravitics disk. This implies that the science is in the same state as the ICBM, namely that no new breakthroughs are needed, only intensive development engineering. The full text of this document can be found in Stan Deyo's book, The Cosmic Conspiracy. By the late 50s, the United States Air Force inherited a flying saucer project from Canada called the Avro Disk. On April 14, 1959, at a Washington press conference, General Frank Britton announced imminent test flights of a craft destined to make all other forms of supersonic aircraft obsolete. However, in public demonstrations, the Avro disk bobbled and wobbled, barely lifting off the runway. Were government saucer projects just a pipe dream or a smokescreen? Saucer craft were summarily denounced as an unfeasible and unwarranted waste of taxpayers' money. By December of 1961, the Air Force officially withdrew all participation in the Avro car project. After its sorry performance, the hapless contraption was relegated to the Air Force Museum at Fort Eustis, Virginia, worthy of only collecting dust, and certainly no match for the awesome spectacle of rocketry the world would experience for the next 3 decades. Further public discussion of anti-gravity propulsion development abruptly ceased. The 60s found the United States and the Soviet Union locked in a Cold War race to build superior missile arsenals. The American public was overwhelmed with media images of thundering rocket technology, power to challenge the gods, blasting America into the space age. The hard reality of NASA engineering eclipsed the nonsense of flying saucers. Across America, racial tensions, urban unrest, and the Vietnam War came to preoccupy our national consciousness. Though UFO reports stubbornly persisted, the government maintained a consistent, hostile, hardline policy of denial to the subject. Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, the Robertson Panel, and the Condon Report were all official government UFO investigation programs designed to convince the public that nothing out of the ordinary exists. The whole mystery was debunked as misinterpretation of natural phenomena by uninformed or unbalanced observers. But behind closed doors, this subject was taken as anything but silly. Clearly, flight capability exhibited by UFOs would provide the ultimate weapons advantage to any nation mastering flying saucer technology. Hence, official interest in UFOs was classified above top secret. Test flights of black-budget craft could be conveniently hidden behind a smokescreen of UFO confusion. In fact, President Ronald Reagan was specifically briefed on this disinformation cover by the CIA in 1981. Project Dove was revealed as a complex series of operations by our military intelligence agencies to disinform the public. In order to keep classified aircraft secret, we tend to convince at times the public and press that maybe UFOs are real in order to make the public think what they are seeing are actually UFOs instead of our own secret aircraft, even though we know maybe some of the sightings are of actual UFOs. Practical examples of black research and development revealed to the public have been the U-2 and the SR-71 Blackbird high-altitude spy planes, as well as the F-117 stealth fighter and the B-2 stealth bomber. But tales abound of government top-secret saucer projects as well. According to researcher Michael Schratt, in 1967, Mr. Jack D. Pickett, retired World War II combat veteran and publisher, claims he saw 4 flying saucers of different sizes at MacDill Air Force Base in Florida. Parked outdoors in storage were 4 flying discs ranging in size from 20 to 108 feet in diameter. Apparently, due to maneuverability problems, the craft had been decommissioned to be scrapped. But Pickett was assured the Air Force had replaced them with better ones. Pickett was originally enlisted to write an article about the discs for the base NCO newsletter, but at the last moment the request was withdrawn by the Air Force. North of Las Vegas, Nevada, on the Nellis Air Force Base test range in the Grue Mountains is the location of the famed Area 51. Over the last 3 decades, this base has become legendary as the home to our military's most highly guarded aircraft. Otherwise known as Dreamland, this area is notorious as well for more radical aircraft designs, including flying saucers. Tantalizing eyewitness accounts of flying saucers at Area 51 are revealed in the book UFO Crash at Aztec by William Steinman and Wendell Stevens. One tells of a base security guard who, while on duty, claimed he saw a hangar door open during the night and saw an unusual object come out and take off straight up. The craft was described as disc-shaped with dull tone lights. Another report tells of an aviation photographer on assignment who inadvertently found himself in a restricted flight area where he witnessed a saucer-shaped craft approaching at a low altitude over the desert. It was the size of a small fighter jet, saucer-shaped except for a plexiglass canopy. This errant photographer was swiftly corralled by security police and removed from the area. In 1978, a Navajo Indian witnessed 2 military helicopters escorting a dark, disc-shaped object near the Atomic Energy Commission facility in Nevada. He described the craft as smooth-skinned, metallic, and circular in form, with a raised dome top. Tribal elders, apparently aware of such ships, warned the witness not to disclose his experience. Most notorious of the Area 51 accounts comes from a physicist named Robert Lazar, a former employee from Site 51, Dreamland, who made the sensational claim of seeing as many as 9 variations of captured alien flying discs housed at the Groom Lake facility, at least one of which was fully operational. During his employment, he claims to have witnessed a flight demonstration of this craft inside the secret hangar complex. Emitting a static hiss, a bluish corona appeared around the ship, then it slowly lifted into the air, where it remained silently hovering. Such performance marks a striking parallel to the performance of T. Townsend Brown's laboratory model way back in 1953. Another dramatic case documented near Lake Houston, Texas, tells of 2 women and a 7-year-old boy who witnessed a large diamond-shaped craft hovering over the road they were traveling. However, in addition to the UFO, these witnesses reported as many as 25 large, double-rotored CH-47 military helicopters accompanying this object. Were these choppers trying to corral a space invader or flying support for a nuclear-powered test vehicle? The 3 witnesses later reported suffering radiation sickness from exposure to this strange craft. The Australian outback is home to another Joint Defense Space Research Facility, not unlike Nevada's Area 51. Located 12 miles from Alice Springs is a test range simply referred to as Pine Gap. Stan Deyo's book Cosmic Conspiracy also tells the report of 3 hunters who in December 1989 saw a camouflaged door open up in the grounds of Pine Gap, and a metallic circular disc ascended vertically and soundlessly into the air before disappearing at great speed. An astounding account comes from Puerto Rico by researcher Jorge Martin, tells of 2 Navy F-14 Tomcat fighters that buzzed a gigantic, triangular-shaped UFO in the Cabo Rojo Hills on December 28, 1988. Eyewitnesses allege the Tomcats intercepted the object and then were somehow trapped or taken aboard this huge craft. Some researchers are so audacious as to suggest the fighters were simply landing aboard this flying aircraft carrier as part of a routine exercise. Was it an alien craft or another top-secret United States flying saucer? Lastly, researcher William Hamilton tells a curious account which took place during the 1991 Gulf War. Security at all national military defense installations was at fever pitch against possible terrorist reprisal threat from Iraq's Saddam Hussein. Yet a gigantic UFO was reported flying unchallenged in highly restricted airspace over Edwards Air Force Base in California. Another curious side note to the Persian Gulf conflict was a new array of spy drones dispatched to keep watch on Iraq's military activities at the time. The August 1991 issue of Popular Mechanics magazine shows the photograph of Shadow, an unmanned aerial vehicle, UAV, used for reconnaissance surveillance. Shadow is a shameless, 6-foot diameter flying saucer built by none other than the United States Air Force. If the idea of black-budget saucer technology seems too far-fetched, one might consider this statement from former director of Lockheed's notorious Skunk Works at Area 51, Ben Rich. We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Rich is also quoted as saying, "Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." In 1990, at a symposium at Tucson's University of Arizona, spacecraft design specialist David Froning from McDonnell Douglas Corporation, who had been on contract to NASA as well, addressed an audience of astrophysicists, astronomers, and engineers, where he candidly admitted obsolete rocket science was being replaced with modified field propulsion, anti-gravity, matter-antimatter conversion, exotic field tension, time travel, and transluminal flight, faster than light travel. Later in 1990, the respected Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine confirmed development of exotic top-secret flight machines. In 2 feature articles, the lid was ever so slightly lifted on super-classified projects underway at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada and Edwards Air Force Base in California. Both bases have been home to classified vehicles for decades. The number and sophistication of new aircraft appear to have increased sharply over the last 10 years. Vehicles now flying from these well-guarded sites include both manned and unmanned hypersonic aircraft designed to perform strategic reconnaissance and other, less conventionally defined, missions. Aviation Week went on to say there is substantial evidence that another family of craft exists that relies on exotic propulsion and aerodynamic schemes not fully understood at this time. There are bigger and better things out there. Other reports more bluntly stated, there are things being flown over the Nevada desert that would make George Lucas drool. Another Air Force officer claims, we are testing vehicles that defy description. To compare them to the SR-71 Blackbird spy plane would be like comparing Leonardo da Vinci's parachute design to the space shuttle. Despite oppressive security, stories of exotic vehicles persist. Of course, this line of research is not to dismiss the UFO phenomena as being the exclusive product of Earth technology. The unknowns reported flying in our skies could be both terrestrial and extraterrestrial. How would the average layman in the street know the difference? Assuming the physics involved with saucer propulsion are based on universal principles, technologies we are just now mastering could have been discovered and harnessed by any number of alien races eons ago. Accounts of UFOs date back to antiquity, a phenomenon as old as mankind itself. Mastery of anti-gravity technology could, as Albert Einstein suggested, accommodate interstellar travel by generating electromagnetic fields that are freed from the bounds of time and space as well as gravity, thus rendering travel of fantastic distances between inhabited star systems no more extraordinary than a jaunt to the corner grocery. Also, there are those who suggest that terrestrial UFO projects are alien-sponsored, that extraterrestrials, for whatever reasons, have made covert treaties with Earth governments offering technical assistance to competing world powers. Some argue the Nazi Project Saucer came from just such a pact. German rocket scientist Dr. Hermann Oberth cryptically stated, "We cannot take the credit for our record advancement in certain scientific fields alone. We have been helped." When asked by whom, he replied, "The people of other worlds." Discourse from the famed Edward Billy Meyer alien contact case confirms the existence of covert government UFO projects. In 1975, a Swiss farmer living near Zurich claims to have had ongoing visits with extraterrestrial beings said to come from the Pleiades star system. A collection of discussions between Billy Meyer and these cosmonauts, titled Messages from the Pleiades, Volume 1, reveals, the building of such Earth-flying saucers is not new, because the first of this sort had been designed and were under construction in your year 1941. The order for this was given by a leader of your Second World War, Adolf Hitler. Many observations of flying saucers and kidnappings are of Earth origin. Of that, Earthmen should be conscious, as their pilots are well aware that they will be assumed to be of extraterrestrial origin. This knowledge is used by them when they announce to any credulous witness that they are extraterrestrials. President Reagan's CIA UFO briefing in 1981 revealed military intent to capitalize on captured ET technologies. Extraterrestrials can travel that great distance by means of space tunnels. They seem to be able to bend the distance from one point in space to another. Just how they do this must be explained scientifically. Some extraterrestrial information was evaluated with the idea of using the gained data to advance our own space technology and future space programs. Is UFO propulsion really as far beyond human reach as we've been led to believe? A chain of circumstantial evidence certainly points to the possibility that such technology has been secretly advanced on Earth at least since World War II. Evidence further suggests that even now this technology continues to be developed behind closed doors. Black world projects, protected from public scrutiny behind the cloak of national security, financed by black budgets, likely provide necessary support for these activities. Secrecy and a careful program of disinformation keeps the population at large ignorant of the true nature of these projects. With this in mind, combined with the evidence examined herein, it is not inconceivable that saucer craft built by the United States government have deliberately posed as alien ships to mislead the public. So it appears that W.A. Harbinson's basic assertion in his book Genesis, that flying saucers are products of a covert world of science fiction technology that presently exists in this country, is tangible enough to warrant deeper consideration. The evidence is compelling enough for researcher William Hamilton to state,
well, guess what? That's the real reality. What you've been living in your everyday life, worried about gas prices, or the ball game, or your next vacation at Disneyland, is a world of fantasy that's been created for you to keep you entertained. There are two nations here in the United States.
what other technologies lie concealed in this secret nation, and what is their ultimate purpose? The investigation continues.